welcome back to a Flourishing Start podcast. In this episode, one of our speakers is an attorney and may reference laws and legal information related to early childhood education and mental health. Please know that this is shared only as general information and is not legal advice. So, this podcast was created knowing one important fact about brain development, which is that a child's brain doubles in size in their first year of life, keeps growing to about 80% of adult size by the age of 3, and is more than 90% developed by the age of 5. Never again in our lifetime are our brains as flexible as they are during this time. Our brains are designed to allow an immense amount of learning. It also means that young children are vulnerable to negative experiences,
which may affect how they interact with the world around them, and in turn, how adults see them and label their behavior.
Knowing this fact, we are using our platform at a Flourishing Start podcast and this episode to share with our listeners that there's actually no such thing as a bad child. I recently found out through our guest, Tori, who we'll introduce in just a few moments, that when students are not successful in early childhood education or are subject to exclusionary discipline like suspension or expulsion, which, by the way, preschool children are expelled at 3 times the rate of children in kindergarten to 12th grade. They are more likely to continue to get in trouble at school and later on get lower test scores. They even have a higher likelihood of criminal justice involvement, a phenomenon known as the preschool-to-prison pipeline. In this episode, we will focus specifically on children who have experienced the foster care system because of the unique experience they have in the education system. In this episode, we have 2 guests with us, Sara Guillermo and Tori Porell. Tori earned her BA from Northeastern University and JD from UC Berkeley School of Law. Go Bears. Tori initially joined the East Bay Children's Law Offices, also known as EBCLO, in 2018 as an Equal Justice Works Fellow and founded the Strong Beginnings program, providing tailored support for children 0 to 5 years old with complex developmental, mental health, and educational issues. After 2 years of providing civil legal aid to homeless youth in Alameda County at Bay Area Legal Aid, Tori rejoined EBCLO as an education attorney. Tori currently works to address the educational needs of EBCLO's clients of all ages and works towards closing the educational achievement gap for foster youth. Welcome, Tori. I wanted to go ahead and ask you what motivates you to show up for children 0 to 5?
Thanks, Esme. Yeah, I had a particular interest in kids 0 to 5 because I taught pre-K before I ever went to law school. So this population's always been close to my heart. But once I started, working as an advocate and learning to support young people and families, I was working with kids who were facing expulsion, primarily high school students. But when I would get their records and review them, I would look back at a history, and those kids usually started struggling really early. By kindergarten, first, second grade, they were already being suspended, they weren't making academic progress, and they weren't getting the support that they needed. So by the time that they made it to high school, it's no wonder that they were still struggling. They had gotten the message that school wasn't really a place for them, that they were bad, and no one had taken the time to see what supports that they needed. So I really wanted to find a way that we could intervene earlier and help kids feel successful at school.
I definitely enjoy the piece of you being a preschool teacher before becoming an attorney. Really gives you that hands-on experience with young children. Thank you, Tori, and welcome to our podcast. Our second guest is Sara Guillermo. Sara is the CEO of Ignite National, bringing to the role over 15 years of experience in helping young women break into America's political landscape to become leaders within their communities and beyond. Sara was one of the first employees at Ignite over a decade ago and quickly ascended within the organization, eventually taking over as CEO in June 2021. Congratulations, Sara. And as someone who has dedicated her life to empowering women, Sara is proud to lead by example as an immigrant, first generation college graduate, youth organizer, educator, foster parent, and breast cancer survivor. Sara, welcome. I wanted to ask you, what motivates you to show up for a child 0 to 5?
Yeah, thank you, Esme, for having me today. Tori, I'm excited for this conversation. I have two little humans under the age of 5. I have a little boy who just turned 5, but I think he thinks he's 15. And then I have a 10-month-old who kind of looks like a toddler functionally. And, having them in front of me in this time that we are facing in this country and across the world, I think showing up for them is so critical, whether that means I'm showing up as a CEO, whether or not I'm showing up in the space with them as a mom, or it's advocating for them in the spaces that they don't have a voice in yet and don't even know about. And so I think literally the possibility of what could happen. And we'll talk a little bit more about our journey for our little our little P a little bit later. But I think the journey for us, for my husband and I, of having children, was a long road. And so I think there's that. And then I have a lot of experience working in K through 12 education. And so have spent quite a bit of time understanding what the school to pipeline component is. And now actually with my kiddo, understand what that preschool component looks like because of the several experiences we've had so far.
Thank you for sharing, Sara. Tori, I will highlight for you that Sara is a lifelong mentor of mine personally. We met when I was in 8th grade, I believe, or not, maybe along those lines, but
sometime.
It's been a while. And I just wanted to highlight that we have two amazing guests today. I'm beyond excited of the conversation that we're having today because of its importance. Sara, would you be able to share your story of becoming a mother to P?
Yeah, and we're going to call him P because there was a component of time for the foster care system. So to protect his privacy, we'll keep referring to him as that. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2017, and we had frozen 15 eggs before I started chemo. And I wanted to get through the 5 years of being a cancer survivor before my husband and I decided that we were going to have kids. And so we got to the 5-year mark, and we were in the middle of I think even start of the pandemic. I don't even remember the time frame of 2020, but at some point in the year of 2020, my husband and I decided that we were going to sign up to be foster parents. My husband's adopted, and so that there was always a component for us of bringing our family together and bridging our family through adoption. And so we actually met our little guy in January of 21. So it's been about 2 years that we've been in each other's lives. And he moved in with us in January. And we have had quite an interesting experience because as a foster parent, you don't know everything. I mean, for you to even know 1% of data about a kid that's coming into your home is pretty non-existent. And so, he did start calling me mommy from the get-go. But I really got that title legally just this past year.
Yeah. I wanted to celebrate that. Congratulations to you and P and your family on creating a family unit together. Yeah. It's beautiful. Well, we can go ahead and go on to the next question too. Sara, when we were talking about what this episode could look like, you let me know that P was experiencing some negative experiences at school. Do you want to highlight just, I would say, the point that you realized that you were going to have to do a lot of advocacy for P?
Yeah, I didn't know you could get suspended from preschool, everybody. I did not know that was a thing. So our kiddo went in, we were getting the little reports at the end of the day because they have to document everything. And it was everything from like, oh, he accidentally pushed somebody to, oh, he bit somebody to like something. And I was like, well, is this like 3-year-old behavior? Are other 3-year-olds doing this? Is my kid stack the same height as another kid? Are all these kids, grew up, are just starting to go back to preschool because of the pandemic? Like, so I was like thinking about all of those different factors. And we were, gosh, it was like February. And then on my husband's birthday in July, we got a phone call that was like, you got to pick him up now and you can't come back yet. And I was like, so tell me more about what that means. And so we got there and he had a behavior that was, not part of that was a hard behavior that he was experiencing, and he had lashed out on another kiddo, or that was a language that they had used. And I was like, I don't know if I would have used that language. But that was what they used. And my kiddo was like walking around with the director. Like, so I was like, oh, great. So knowing everything I knew about what, all of the messaging that he was absorbing at 3 years old from this experience, I was like, oh, geez, we've got a lot to do. So we couldn't go back until we basically had some semblance of a behavior plan for him. And so I was like, it was disappointing because it's like we're in the middle of the day. And it was also the same day that we learned that our surrogate was pregnant with our baby. So it was like such a day. And we had to do a lot of figuring it out. And so we already knew from his social worker that there was a mental health referral, but anybody that's worked with a county, that can take, 3 to 6 months at a minimum to get anything to move. And they're like, you're number 3. And I was like, so what number did I start with? And so and social workers are very busy, and each are very different. And so I had to stay on top of the social worker and the phone call that I had that day. And the hard part too at that time is that he was switching social workers. And so like I called the social worker. She's like, I'm no longer the social worker. And I'm like, okay, then who's the social worker? She's like, I don't know. And I'm like, is that even a thing? Like, is that possible? So I was spending the whole day like, oh, these are things that are reality for humans that I did not even know existed. And then we had to I basically started to figure out like, if he doesn't have this service, where can we get other services while we're waiting for this evaluation to start the process? And so we were able to get some support, but it took a solid 6 to 8 weeks of my kiddo not going to preschool. And what we ultimately decided at that point was that we had an opportunity to go to a therapeutic preschool program, also something I never knew existed. And they were like asking me all these questions about his background. I'm like, I've had him for like less than 6 months. I can't answer half of these questions. And I think that's a component of the foster care system, is you want to help the kids that are in your home, but you you don't have a lot of data. And so you're just using what you know from from the time frame that you have. And you can kind of make some speculations based on what anybody has told you. And so our kiddo went to therapeutic preschool for a whole year, and it was magical. He never had another piece of paper or a stack of papers that basically told us that he did X, Y, and Z. It helped with his regulation. And then it was a different picture transitioning him out of that and going into the public school system. And so I already knew that we have all of these behaviors. He is working on them, but he's human. He's 4 years old at that time. And we were still going through a lot of things with the court. And I was like, I had to advocate for educational rights, because as a foster care parent, you don't like automatically get these rights to be able to support your kiddo. So I had to go to court and ask for these rights, get a piece of paper, take it to the district so that I can make educational decisions for my kiddo. And so before the school year even started, I was already like, here are my ed rights. Here are my ed rights. When can we get, and usually they're called a student support team meeting. And so I advocated the heck out of it and didn't get it before the school year started, but did get it pretty early in the academic year. And so right now, and I think one of the core things that we learned from that is that the district itself are not so quick to putting kiddos in specific plans. They kind of want to see where it goes. And I get it from an educational standpoint. It makes sense to a certain degree, though, as a parent, I know what my kid has gone through now and what these different experiences have led. And so it's hard. He was enrolled in an after school program at his public school, and he got suspended from that. In the middle of the academic year, in the middle of the day. And so we had to refigure out that. And so there's a lot in the journey of trying to figure out where you can push, where you can pull. And then if nobody else can give you anything within the education system, where do you need to go outside of that to get it? Because I'm not dumb. I know that my kid has all of these different components. And I think the other component to think about here is that the first question I asked, and I have notes on it because I'm kind of a copious note taker, but the first question I asked the social worker when we were even getting the information about him, before we even met him, I was like, is this kid in therapy? And they're like, well, he's 3. And I'm like, yeah, he's 3. So is he in therapy?
Yes.
And so it took us 8 months to get him into therapy, but that's something to think about is this larger, I don't know if it's a society thing, it's a lack of resources thing, all of the above. And then a stigma, clearly, right? Of why kids under 5 don't need all of these different therapeutic services, because it's not autism, it's not this, but it's still dysregulating them in order to be able to be avid participants within their community. I'm going to pause there because I said a lot, and we can dive into other pieces as we go along.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story with us and P's story along too. And this goes for all guests. Feel free to interject at any point with comments. So, given that there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to children's rights or even what they're deserving of, Tori, I think this is a great place for us to ask you. Could you share with us why children who were in the care system or are currently in foster care system are more likely to be caught in this prison or preschool to prison pipeline?
Yeah. The answer is actually pretty simple, and it's trauma. So whatever happened to children before they come into contact with the foster care system, foster care in and of itself is traumatic. You have a child being removed from a caregiver and being placed with another caregiver who they may or may not know or have any relationship with already. And we know how important attachment is for children in those early years. So disrupting a primary attachment like that is going to have some serious consequences for a child's mental health, and you're likely going to see that in their behavior. So I think there's a tendency to, label these kids as bad or as problem children or as difficult, willful, things like this. And people aren't considering what has happened to them and what traumas they've already endured in their young lives.
Right.
Well, can I add something to that too? I think, Tori, something that we've realized too is that we're part of the equation, right? So how we respond to him, how we create the environment for him is such a big component. And as human beings, we're growing too. And so I think that that's one of the pieces to always consider is my husband didn't realize that a lot of P's behavior was actually going to trigger him. because of his own experiences as an adopted kiddo. And so I think it's an interesting component to think about. And like all of us are in therapy, frankly. There's a family therapy and everyone's got their individual therapy. But I think that's a core piece about like trauma is experienced at so many different levels. And the adults in the picture all have experienced a level of trauma as well. And specifically too, like we have P, and we've also had other foster kids. And so what does it mean when they actually do return back to their family and that new unstable environment? And how do you help stabilize that without them being in your home again?
Yeah.
Thank you for adding that piece, Sarah. Tori, I think as an attorney practicing in California, could you give us a high-level overview of a child's entitlements? For example, if a child is found to be at high risk for experiencing a developmental delay, which systems are mandated to intervene and provide necessary services to address those delays?
Sure. So I can speak specific to what our system looks like here in California, but nationally, there are similar systems in every state to serve children with developmental delays or suspected developmental delays at every stage. So here in California, the first system is through the regional center. It's a program called Early Start. So this program serves children from birth up until their third birthday. So if a child isn't developing on track or there are concerns about any particular aspect of their development, they can be referred directly to the regional center, who will do an assessment and determine if that child needs services. Oftentimes, these referrals are made by pediatricians who are seeing children in their offices and asking questions about their milestones, and they're able to flag if something's kind of off, maybe about this child's developmental track. The services a child might get through Early Start are things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, or general infant development services. So working with a specialist who has training in developing that child's cognitive and emotional potential. So once children get to 3 years old, the system shifts, and this can often be a time when services kind of fall off or things kind of fall apart. There's supposed to be a whole process for kids to transition seamlessly from one system to the other, but I've rarely seen it work that way. So once children are 3 years old, they are then required to be served by their school district. So at that point, children are eligible for what's called an IEP, or an individualized education program. There's a completely separate eligibility process for that. At that point, a child would need to have one of 13 listed disabilities, and they would require special education to access their learning. So many times young children in that 3 to 5 age range are eligible under a speech and language impairment and just need speech therapy. A child might be diagnosed with autism at that point and be eligible for an autism-specific special day class where they're getting behavior support in addition to speech and occupational therapy, things like that. But a lot of people who have preschool-age children don't know where to turn for help because their children aren't in school yet. They wouldn't necessarily know to go to their school district, but that is where they should be seeking services, even if their children aren't in TK or kindergarten yet.
Yeah, thank you for giving this overview of some entitlements that children have. I think, Sarah, would you be able to provide some on-the-ground experience that you've had trying to navigate the education system, particularly for some of the entitlements that Tori just gave an overview of?
Yeah, we didn't qualify for regional center because by the time we got our kiddo, he was already, he had passed his third birthday. And so that's like a core question actually at the pediatrician's office of like, and now he's had like 3 pediatricians, but like the core question is like, did he get this or did he not? And sometimes it's interesting, like the behaviors don't show up until a kid actually feels comfortable to show them. And so I think that's something to think about with like the layer of trauma, is that sometimes the issues, like a lot of the issues that we were facing in terms of the social behaviors at the schools, at the preschool, didn't show up till like nearly 4 or 5 months later. And so like when you're starting and you get a placement, it's, though you can ask the question, people are like, well, what are you observing? And I was like, well, it's a transition in this kid's life. Like, I'm not going to observe everything yet. And so we didn't qualify, though, as we were going through the process, everything went through the county, because I didn't have the educational rights, until like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago. And you have to petition for that within the court. And so unless I didn't go to the court hearing at the specific day and time that I did to ask for it so that I could be on the docket next time, I would have probably had to wait until he was formally adopted, to actually get the rights. And like, it's also like, these are like tiny things, but people don't think about it. Like, because he was still in foster care, we didn't have a birth certificate, and frankly, we still don't. But like, I had to register, when I registered him to actually go into the district, it was all these different pieces of paper to even demonstrate that I could. Because I didn't have, and they're like, well, did you get sign off that you have the rights to even enroll him in school? And so it's all of these like different things to navigate. I know it's like things you don't think about because they're like, well, what proof do you have? So, and I mean, they're very kind and they've worked with many, many families, and like, it's not that they're asking it in like a wrong way, but it is like a component of like, there is a lot of paperwork to have to figure out. And then I think the other piece is like, where do they go after they're 5? And I think the hard part that Tori described of like 3 to 4 and like that seamless transition isn't necessarily always seamless. I think the harder part too is like, where do you go after 5? So like, we have services till, P's 5 years old and 330 or 363 days. And then when he's 6, we have to transition into a whole new set of services. And so that's another layer of maneuvering. And we know that there are services that we're going to be able to do within the school day that we've already tapped into. But there are still other layers to the supports that he needs from a mental health perspective. So like right now we have a mental health therapist that's literally helping to address his trauma and the attachment and his social emotional needs. And then we have another therapist who's specifically a behavioral therapist that is helping us regulate specific behaviors. And we couldn't get to the behavior therapist until we had significant amount of time with our mental health therapeutic side of it, because you can't address the behaviors until you get to some of the regulation related to the trauma. And so it's an interesting thing to think about, because I was like, why didn't you guys give me this before? They're like, you weren't ready. And like, if we did start it earlier, because I was like, we've only had it for 2 weeks. And I'm like, this is the best thing ever. I'm like, I don't want that to go away, but it's like time sensitive, because the behaviors that they have at 5 years old are going to be really different than what 13 looks like and what 16 looks like. Right. So, I think, we're preparing for that. I'm not counting down the days till, September next year for when we have to do that next transition. But I think it's something, there's all these little details. I think Tori outlined the big picture of it. And then it's the navigation of like, how do you get to one? Because even if you go to the regional center, like here in Contra Costa County, you have to just to do medical records to get one piece of paper signed. So like, say I wanted to enroll him in the school district, I needed, like every parent has to have a clearance of health from the pediatrician that the kid can go to school. So you can't just drop it off at the pediatrician's office. You have to go to the to the medical records in the hospital to drop it off, and then they have like a whole time period to get it. So you can't be a parent that like waits, till the last minute. I'm not that parent. Never. Just kidding. I'm in the middle type of parent. I'm like, oh, I really want to be early, but I forgot because I had things to do. And so then you have to like go and pick it up and then take it to school and then do all of that enrollment component. And then when you get to the school site, there are like so many things that you have to do and keep up with to be able to make sure that you're on top of supporting your kid. Because now he has a behavior plan in the classroom. And so like yesterday, I'm talking to his teacher to figure out like, how's it going? When are we going to reassess it? And simultaneously, like within the foster care system, you have like a set side of meetings. So like you have your child and family team meetings when you're still affiliated with a county. And then you have your like just continued support meetings. So we still have those. And so all of the providers and all the key stakeholders in his life meet pretty regularly to kind of look through the overall game plan in terms of reaching some of our goals related to therapy, both from a social emotional side and behavior. And so his teacher comes, we come, all of his therapists come, and then there's a specific person that like leads us through everything. And that helps us stay like all connected. And then it ensures that the services are happening at the rate that we need them to.
It sounds, Sarah, like you've been an amazing advocate for P. And I just wanted to flag that foster youth actually have some specific education rights that are specific to them as foster youth, but schools don't always know about them, and districts aren't always the best about honoring them. So, for example, foster youth have a right to immediate enrollment in school without any of their documents. So without their birth certificate, without proof that they're in foster care, without their vaccines, they are supposed to be enrolled on the spot. And then the district is supposed to work with their family to get all of that stuff once they're enrolled. But that is a big one that I'm helping families enforce all the time, so that these kids don't actually have a delay in getting enrolled in school.
I wanted to open up our segment in this part of the podcast for Sara and Tori to ask each other questions. Sara, is there anything that you'd like to ask Tori about?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of curious, Tori, from your Strong Beginnings program and all the families that you've worked with, what are your kind of key learnings or trends that you're seeing from that specific intervention?
Yeah. So when I started the program, we did kind of a data review of all of our kids that we serve under 5. My office represents all of the kids in foster care in Alameda County. So we had a good kind of sample there. And what we were noticing was there was a big gap in between kids being identified as having potentially a developmental delay and them getting referred for assessment and the assessment actually happening. Yeah. So something was breaking down in there. We started as a part of our, biannual visits with our clients doing a screening called the ASQ. It's the Ages and Stages questionnaire. And it is for all kids under 5 to look at, are they meeting their expected developmental progress and in what areas? But then we were identifying even more kiddos who have potential developmental delays. And we really had to work on the process for making sure that translated into getting those kids the support that they need. So it needs a referral to the regional center usually, or for an IEP. And then there are specific timelines under which the regional center or the school district are supposed to do those assessments. And oftentimes they're not meeting them. So it then requires more follow-up and advocacy to make sure those assessments happen within the timelines. The timelines are there because we know that this intervention is important and needs to happen as soon as possible in this really critical developmental period. And then once a kid is entitled to those services, actually making them happen. So there's like a huge shortage of speech therapists right now. So even if You can get a child eligible for speech therapy. There's no guarantee that there's a therapist available to serve them.
Yeah.
So we found that, identification was kind of one thing, and it was actually going pretty well. We were able to spot the kids who needed the support, but actually getting them the support is kind of really where things broke down.
Yeah. That's like a lived experience for us.
Yeah. I can see that.
Are there any other questions that y'all would like to ask each other? We have a few more questions for taking action, but I could still open this time up for y'all to ask each other more questions too.
Yeah. Sarah, what would have been, what is something that you wish you would have known, before kind of embarking on this journey to get support for P?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I knew that you could actually get suspended from preschool. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but I just didn't realize it was a reality. And to even understand, and I get it, and at the same time, understanding behavioral systems for really young, toddlers and 3-year-olds, it's something that I wish I understood that a little bit better. And now it's literally our worst nightmare. So over the break, we got a phone call in the middle of the day where we had to pick him up because something happened. I was like, oh my God, I have PTSD from Rolly's. And I was like, so can he come back tomorrow? And just, I think being a parent and you don't want your kid to be labeled as this bad kid, as this kid with behavioral issues, this kid that can't get along with other people. That is the last thing you want. And you don't want him to grow up feeling like he's that person either. And so, I mean, I do really praise my husband and I and the adults that surround him the most, that really ingrain in him that these are behaviors and we know that you are trying to express big emotions. And really centering it around that, because to just think about the first, 2.5 years of this kiddo's life, and to see him now and thrive and run and jump and sing his songs and dance in the middle of a New Year's party, and feel free and loved and cared for and safe, I think is really, really critical. And so I wish I understood that. And then I wish there was a systematic shift in early education so that we could not have kids start with that at 3 years old or even younger, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think preschool discipline can be really sneaky, too, because, when kids in K through 12 are suspended, there's a form and it goes on their record and everything, but not every preschool is like that. More often, there's what I call informal discipline, which is when the school is calling parents to pick a kid up early, maybe all the time, maybe a couple times a week, and just saying hey, they're having a hard day, or something happened. But those things add up. And especially for kids in foster care who are with a foster parent who might have other kids to take to appointments or works, they can't afford to be called out of work, a few times a week to pick their kid up from preschool.
Well, and then what do you do? Well, I know what I did because it's happened to me so many times now, but it's interesting. And my husband and I have been working on this is what's the is there discipline? Is there not discipline? Because sometimes I don't necessarily agree, but I understand you have a policy and we have to follow the policy. I get it. And simultaneously, how much of that carries into the home. And I think that's a core component that families really need to think about is how much of that do you carry? How much of that do you associate yourself with? Because you want them to know that that behavior can't continue at that particular place. So when my kiddo got, quote unquote suspended from his current after school program, I was to me, I had a conversation with the director. I was and the realization to me was your team does not and will not, in this particular academic year, have the skill set to be able to work with my kid at this time. And my kid can change, yes, but he is also at the time 4 years old. So I had to think globally of like, what does he actually need at this time? And so he needs one-on-one attention. And so, and sometimes foster families can't afford that. And so like, what do you do then? So I think there's all of these different pieces. And frankly, like, I can think that, but like, as I'm sitting in foster care family, like circles, like sometimes we're just not afforded that ability to consider that as an opportunity for our kiddos, or financially be able to create that resource for them.
As a mother advocating tirelessly at home and professionally as the CEO of Ignite National, how can a parent start to build up their confidence in themselves to advocate for their child?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're our kid's best advocate. And then it's a little different when you're a foster parent, because I think mentally foster parents go through this whole thing in their heads of like, how much do I advocate for this kid? How much energy do I have? And kind of like play that game in their head. And so I've never met a foster parent who didn't play that a little bit in their head, because when you start some of these services that Tori and I have been talking about, it's the long game. So like sometimes as a foster parent, you might start it and then they have to, and this happened with the other kiddos that we had, we started it and then they went home and then the services stopped because they didn't engage in them. Right. And so I think it's something to think about of like how, like, in order to be able to build the confidence, you need to like figure out how much you're going to be able to support this kiddo and what they need right now. And I think a lot of this is for foster parents in particular, they need to understand the system. Like they need to understand the different levers of power and the different loopholes that they need to, like, that's how you advocate, is you have to say, my kid needs X, Y, and Z. And so like, unless you have that direct language, you can't just say, my kid needs therapy, because that's not necessarily going to get you exactly what you need or even lead you down the path to understanding what you need. And so I think a lot of it is the knowledge. Like you have to understand what the system is, how the system plays with each other, to be able to navigate it. And I feel like that's, once you understand that, then you can be so confident to get your kiddo the resources that you need. Or that they need. I mean, it is a we, though. We all need the same resources for each other.
Right. And Tori, I wanted to just I wanted to see if you would be able to share with our listeners what your professional role is, like your title, and what are some resources that you do as a professional in your role.
Yeah. So at my office, I'm our education attorney. I'm our only full-time education attorney. All the other attorneys in my office represent kiddos in foster care in their juvenile court case. So in their foster care case in dependency court. Our office serves about 1,200 kids between birth and 21 years old. And as we talked about, all kiddos in foster care have been through trauma and are more likely to have educational and behavioral needs. So there are a lot of educational issues that come up for all of our clients. I spend about half of my time supporting all of the other attorneys in my office who represent these kiddos as their primary attorney to support their education needs. So to advocate for them at IEP meetings, to advocate for them to get an IEP, to advocate for them to get an early start assessment, to get a behavior plan, to be in a school setting that's appropriate to meet their needs. And And then about 50% of the time, I am working directly with our clients and their families on really tough education issues. So our kiddos who have the highest mental health, educational, and developmental needs. These are oftentimes our clients who are getting expelled from school, who are being suspended repeatedly, who are not learning, are not in an environment that they are able to make progress. And so doing some really intensive advocacy for them to hopefully get their education on the right track.
Thank you for sharing. I think I didn't know that education attorneys existed until I was 23 years old. And so I think, and in Alameda County as well. And as someone that was like suspended pretty frequently, my friends were expelled. I just didn't even know that there was an education attorney. And so, like, I just wanted to make sure our listeners knew that there are attorneys in California and across the US that can provide legal support to a child, as Tori said, even as young as 3 years old, probably even younger. Tori, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like even since they're 0, they're entitled to certain rights. And so we talked about how parents and caregivers, what they can do on an individual level, family level, but how can our current system evolve to better understand early childhood mental health and well-being? Or in other words, how can systems change to better meet the needs of young children and their families? If anyone, feel free to go first.
I think first, if the systems could just talk to each other. I mean, I know that is like simple and like and most people be like, wait, don't they? They don't. And so if only they could talk to each other, but that means a complete overhaul of the humans that exist that are pulling all of these levers. And so like our adoption social worker has been in the game for over 20 years, and our experience with her versus the prior social workers who had less service than her, significantly less service, it was like night and day. And so I never felt nervous, or like had to like think like, oh, I need to do something else to, move something forward for P during that time, because she deeply understood, what we needed and how we were going to get it. And so I think if the current systems, I don't even want to say it's like evolving. Like, I just feel like if there was actual time, and I get it, like social workers, they're getting kids from really dire circumstances and getting them to families. Like, it is a hard job. And simultaneously, like, I think in order to be able to get to the well-being of all the kids, like, there does need to be stronger connections, in communication, in the way that they strategize and do the work together, in order for us to be able to have, from a foster parent perspective, a much more streamlined process. And then the last part of it is like, I think that there does need to be a stronger component of where a foster parent lives in the scheme of all of this, and the role that we play. I think that has been a challenge throughout a lot of the process of being a foster parent, and whether or not it's a value for us to like bring up these issues, with parents, with parents and with social workers. I think that's always of question, which I think that level of, stigma probably needs to be totally obliterated, so that they can get the support that they need.
Yeah. I'll echo you, Sara, on the systems needing to talk to each other more. That is absolutely true. Whether it's the child welfare system and the education system, or, the regional center early start system and the school system where kids are going next, or the mental health system and the education system, because oftentimes kids are getting one service outside of school, they're getting a different service inside of school, and they're not usually harmonized and, all working together towards the same thing. I would say the other thing, just as a general thing that I think would help early childhood mental health is, making early education universal. So making sure every child has access to a high quality preschool program full time if their family wants that, because early education is not just academics. So it's not just learning letters and numbers and colors.
Yeah.
It's a place where children are identified as potentially having a disability. It's a place where they can eat every day. It's a place where they develop their social skills. It's a place where they have another loving adult who is a positive attachment in their life. It's so much more than just, circle time. And I think that if every child had access to that as a resource, that would go a long way to meeting their needs holistically.
Thank you both so much for your expertise across a lot of levels. I think this episode in general has a lot of learning opportunities, and I'm going to replay it multiple times because I'm also just processing everything that has been said. But I do want to thank you both for joining me today. This is the last episode of seasons 1, a Flourishing Start podcast, and I couldn't have thought of a better way to have a season finale other than having both Sara and Tori. So thank you both for coming. This episode marks the end of season 1. We will restart season 2 in early February. Please follow us on our social media, whether that's Instagram or TikTok, to be notified once we are uploading our first episode of our second season. We are looking forward to having you all join us in this conversation in February. We are currently looking for listeners to review our podcast season 1. If you are interested, please email me at health@youthlaw.org or text me, your podcast host, at 661-388-6727. All participants will be compensated for their time of reviewing our first season. So thank you all for tuning in. That is the end of our first season at a Flourishing Start podcast. I'm Esme, your podcast host. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us today on our podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the National Center for Youth Law. To suggest a podcast topic or to express interest in being a podcast guest, please email health@youthlaw.org.